Hello and welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we will be exploring a subject of quiet, unassuming order. Consider the humble garden seed packet. In your hand, it feels like a simple object, a small paper envelope, a vibrant illustration of a perfect tomato or a blooming zinnia on the front, and a block of dense, practical information on the back. Its dimensions are familiar, its purpose clear. It is a promise, a potential garden held in a few square inches of paper. But this uniformity, this reassuring predictability, is a relatively modern invention. A century and a half ago, the world of commercial seeds was a chaotic marketplace of disparate sizes, exaggerated claims, and uncertain quality. The journey from that disorder to the standardized object we know today is not a story of grand battles or dramatic discoveries. Instead, it is a slow, meticulous tale of commercial pressures, technological advancements, and the quiet, persistent demand for truth and reliability. To truly understand the placid object in our hand, we need to gently turn back the pages to a time when a seed packet was anything but standard. The story of the American seed packet's standardization truly begins in the fertile soil of the post-Civil War era, a period of immense industrial growth, westward expansion, and a burgeoning national consciousness. Before the 1870s, the seed trade was a largely local and informal affair. Farmers saved their own seeds from year to year, trading with neighbors for new varieties. For those who wished to purchase seeds, the options were limited. A general store might have a barrel of bean seeds or a sack of corn, from which a customer's order would be scooped out by weight or volume and poured into a simple paper cone or a cloth bag. The information provided was minimal, often just the name of the variety scrawled on the container, if that. Quality was a matter of the storekeeper's reputation and the farmer's luck. The first glimmers of a more organized system came from the religious communities of the Shakers. Known for their diligence, honesty, and craftsmanship, the Shakers began selling seeds in the late 18th century, and by the early 19th, they had developed a highly reputable business. They were among the first to package seeds in small, pre-measured paper packets intended for home gardeners. These early Shaker packets were models of functional simplicity. They were small, rectangular envelopes made of plain paper, printed with simple woodcuts and clear, blocky text. They listed the plant variety, the year the seeds were grown, and the name of the Shaker community that produced them. There were no fanciful color illustrations, only the promise of quality implicit in the Shaker name. They pioneered the concept of the commission box, a wooden crate filled with an assortment of these packets, which they would leave with trusted merchants. At the end of the season, they would return to collect payment for the sold packets and retrieve the unsold ones, ensuring their stock was always fresh. This system was revolutionary, creating a distribution network that bypassed the old bulk bin method. However, the Shaker seed business, while influential, was still a niche market. The great shift toward a national seed industry, and with it the pressures of standardization, would be driven by a different force: the mail-order catalogue. The latter half of the 19th century witnessed the rise of the great American seed companies, names that would become synonymous with gardening itself: James J. H. Gregory, W. Atlee Burpee, D. M. Ferry, Peter Henderson. These entrepreneurs were not just seedsmen, they were marketing visionaries. They saw a vast, untapped market of farmers and home gardeners scattered across the sprawling nation, far from urban centers and reliable nurseries. Their tool for reaching this market was the United States Postal Service, which, following the expansion of the railways, could deliver goods to almost any corner of the country. The mail-order seed catalog was a revolution in itself. It was a book of dreams filled with glowing descriptions of new and improved vegetable varieties, more vibrant flowers, and larger fruits. And to sell these seeds, a new kind of packaging was required. Sending loose seeds through the mail was impractical. The small, pre-filled packet was the perfect solution. It was lightweight, durable enough for transit, and could be produced in massive quantities. This is where the first unofficial wave of standardization began, driven not by government regulation, but by the practicalities of printing and commerce. The most significant technological development to shape the appearance of the seed packet was the perfection of chromolithography. This was a printing technique that allowed for the mass production of multicolored images. The process was painstaking. It involved an artist drawing an image with a greasy crayon onto a large, flat slab of limestone. A separate stone was required for each color to be printed. The stone was then treated with a chemical solution, wetted, and inked. The ink would adhere only to the greasy drawing, and when paper was pressed against the stone, the colored image was transferred. By carefully aligning the paper and printing from multiple stones in succession, a rich, full-color illustration could be created. Chromolithography transformed the seed packet from a simple text-based container into a vibrant piece of advertising. Seed companies hired skilled artists to create idealized, often exaggerated, portraits of their vegetables and flowers. Tomatoes were depicted as perfectly round, blemish-free, and impossibly red. Cabbages were shown bursting with vigor, their heads the size of watermelons. These beautiful, eye-catching illustrations were the primary selling point. A gardener in rural Nebraska, flipping through a catalog or browsing the commission box at the local general store, was captivated by the promise held in these pictures. The widespread adoption of chromolithography created a natural push towards standardizing packet dimensions. Printing was most efficient when many packets could be laid out and printed on a single large sheet of paper or cardstock. This meant that developing a few common sizes made economic sense. A company might settle on a primary size for most of its vegetable and flower seeds, perhaps around 3/4 inches wide by 4.5 inches tall, a dimension that felt comfortable in the hand and provided ample space for a large illustration. They might have a smaller size for seeds that were particularly small or sold in lesser quantities, like herbs, and a larger jumbo packet for bulky seeds, like beans and peas. The internal logic of the commission box system, which the large mail-order companies adopted and expanded from the shaker model, also reinforced this size convergence. DM Ferry & Co. of Detroit, for instance, became masters of this system. They would ship their large wooden display boxes to thousands of merchants across the country. For the packets to fit neatly into the box's compartments, they all had to be of a consistent width. While one company's standard packet might be a 1/4 inch different from a competitor's, the overall trend was toward a limited range of predictable shapes and sizes. This was standardization born of logistics. It was cheaper to print, easier to pack, and more efficient to display if the packets were uniform. However, the information printed on these beautiful Gilded Age packets was anything but standard, and often it was woefully inadequate. The front of the packet was dedicated to the glorious illustration and the variety name, often rendered in ornate flowing script. The company's name and address were also prominently displayed. But beyond that, there was very little to guide the gardener. Planting instructions, if they existed at all, were rudimentary at best, perhaps a simple line saying, "Plant in spring in good soil." Information about germination rates, seed purity, or the year the seed was packed was almost universally absent. This lack of information was compounded by a culture of spectacular exaggeration. The catalogue descriptions and packet illustrations often bore little resemblance to what the seeds would actually produce. A new variety might simply be an old one, given a more exciting name. Seeds were sometimes old, poorly stored, or mixed with dirt, chaff, and weed seeds. For the burgeoning class of amateur home gardeners, this was a source of immense frustration. They would invest their time, labor, and hope, only to be met with poor germination, weak plants, or a variety that was completely different from the one pictured on the packet. For farmers, the consequences could be more severe. A failed crop due to poor quality seed could be a significant financial blow. This period, from roughly 1870 to the turn of the 20th century, was the golden age of the pictorial seed packet, but it was also a wild frontier of unregulated commerce. The packet was a beautiful object, a piece of folk art that promised an idealized version of nature's bounty. Its size was becoming regular, dictated by the mechanics of printing and distribution. But its content, the actual information it conveyed, was left entirely to the discretion of the seller. This situation, however, could not last. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, a new spirit of reform began to sweep across America, a movement that would demand more from its products and its producers. This progressive-era ethos of transparency, scientific rigor, and consumer protection would find its way to the humble seed packet, initiating a second, more deliberate phase of its standardization. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it the progressive era, a period characterized by a widespread belief in social progress, scientific efficiency, and the power of government to correct the ills of society. It was the era of trust-busting, of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, and of the passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Consumers were becoming more organized, more vocal, and less willing to accept the old credo of caveat emptor, or let the buyer beware. This new skepticism naturally extended to the agricultural sector. Gardeners and farmers, armed with a growing body of scientific knowledge, began to demand more than just a pretty picture on their seed packets. They wanted assurance of quality, purity, and varietal correctness. The key players in this new movement were not legislators at first, but scientists and academics at the newly established state agricultural experiment stations and the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. These institutions were founded on the principle that agriculture could be improved through systematic research and the dissemination of knowledge. One of their primary concerns was the quality of the seed supply. Scientists at these stations began to conduct systematic tests on commercially available seeds. They would purchase packets from various companies, just as any ordinary citizen would, and subject them to rigorous laboratory analysis. The process was meticulous and methodical. To test for purity, a sample of seeds would be painstakingly examined under a microscope. Each seed was identified, and any foreign matter, inert material like dirt and stems, or more importantly, the seeds of noxious weeds, was separated and weighed. The result would be expressed as a percentage of pure seed. Germination testing was equally precise. A set number of seeds, usually 100, would be placed on a sterile medium, such as moist blotter paper or in a dish of sand. This sample would then be kept in a controlled environment with specific temperatures and humidity levels optimal for that particular plant species. Over a period of days or weeks, technicians would carefully count the number of seeds that successfully sprouted. The final germination percentage was a direct measure of the seed's viability. These were cold, hard numbers that stood in stark contrast to the flowery, often misleading prose found in seed catalogues. The findings of these experiment stations were often shocking, and they were widely published in agricultural bulletins and journals. They revealed that some companies were selling seeds with germination rates as low as 10 or 20%. Purity tests uncovered packets contaminated with significant amounts of weed seeds, including troublesome species like dodder and thistle, which could infest a farmer's field for years. They also conducted grow-out trials, planting seeds to see if the resulting plants matched the variety advertised on the packet. These trials frequently exposed cases of mislabeling, where a packet of, for example, early Jersey Wakefield cabbage would produce a mix of several different cabbage types, or something else entirely. The dissemination of this information empowered consumers and put pressure on the seed industry. Reputable seedsmen who had always prided themselves on quality found common cause with the reformers. They understood that the deceptive practices of a few unscrupulous dealers tarnished the reputation of the entire industry. The American Seed Trade Association, founded in 1883, began to wrestle with these issues internally, advocating for voluntary standards and ethical guidelines among its members. In response to this mounting pressure, the more forward-thinking seed companies began to change what they printed on their packets. This was a gradual, voluntary evolution. A company might start by printing a small line of text on the back of the packet, stating something like, "These seeds have been tested and show a high percentage of germination." A few years later, this might evolve to include the actual percentage, for example, germination 90%. The year the seed was packed or tested also began to appear, assuring the customer that they were not buying old, non-viable stock. This shift marked a fundamental change in the purpose of the seed packet. It was no longer just a miniature poster. It was becoming a technical data sheet. The back of the packet, previously often left blank or used for general company advertising, was now becoming valuable real estate for this new, crucial information. Basic planting instructions also became more detailed. Instead of a vague suggestion, packets began to include specific information on planting depth, spacing between plants, days to germination, and the ideal time to sow, whether indoors or directly in the garden. This was a recognition that many of their customers were inexperienced home gardeners who needed clear, concise guidance to achieve the success promised by the illustration on the front. The physical design of the packet began to adapt to these new informational requirements. While the beautiful chromolithograph on the front remained the primary marketing tool, the overall layout became more structured. The back was often divided into sections with clear headings, directions for sowing, purity, germination. The typography, which had been ornate and decorative in the Gilded Age, became cleaner and more legible for the informational text. The packet was now serving two masters: the romantic, emotional appeal of the illustration and the rational, scientific demand for data. The first legislative steps toward mandatory standardization came at the federal level with the Seed Importation Act of 1912. This law was designed to stop the dumping of low-quality, contaminated seeds from other countries onto the American market. It required that all imported lots of certain types of forage crop seeds, like alfalfa and clover, be tested by the USDA upon arrival. If the seeds were found to be adulterated with certain weed seeds, or fell below a minimum standard of purity, the entire shipment could be denied entry. While this act didn't directly regulate the packets sold to home gardeners, it established a crucial precedent that the federal government had a legitimate role in ensuring the quality of the nation's seed supply. Following this federal lead, individual states began to pass their own seed laws. These laws varied widely in their scope and enforcement, creating a confusing patchwork of regulations for the large national seed companies. A packet that was legally compliant in Ohio might not meet the requirements for sale in New York. These state laws, however, pushed the industry further down the path of informational transparency. They typically mandated that any agricultural seed sold within the state be accompanied by a label stating the variety name, the percentage of pure seed, the percentage of weed seeds, the name and number of any noxious weed seeds present, and the germination percentage, along with the date of the test. For a time, many companies tried to comply by attaching a separate tag or sticker with this information to their bulk seed bags. But for the small, sealed packets sold to home gardeners, it made more sense to incorporate the required data directly into the packet's printed design. This created another subtle pressure towards standardization of information. A company that shipped its commission boxes nationwide had to design a packet that would satisfy the legal requirements of the most stringent states. It was simply more efficient to print one version of the packet for all markets, one that included all the information that any state might demand. By the 1920s and 1930s, the seed packet had evolved significantly. The standard dimensions, established by the printing and distribution economics of the late 19th century, remained largely the same. The standard retail packet was still a familiar rectangle, approximately 3.25 by 4.5 inches. The front still bore a colorful, idealized image of the plant. But the back was now a dense field of text, a testament to the influence of the progressive era's scientific and consumer rights movements. The packet now carried not just a promise, but a set of specifications. It was a bridge between the art of marketing and the science of agriculture. This evolution, however, was still incomplete. The patchwork of state laws was cumbersome and, in many cases, poorly enforced. The final, decisive step in the meticulous standardization of the American seed packet would require a comprehensive federal law, one that would codify these best practices and make them the mandatory standard for seed commerce across the entire nation. The culmination of decades of advocacy by scientists, consumer groups, and ethical seedsmen arrived in 1939 with the passage of the Federal Seed Act. This landmark piece of legislation represented the final and most definitive stage in the standardization of information on seed packets. It built upon the foundations of the earlier Seed Importation Act and the various state laws, creating a single, comprehensive framework to regulate all agricultural and vegetable seeds sold in interstate commerce. For the national mail-order seed companies, this meant that nearly every packet they produced now had to comply with a uniform set of federal rules. The Federal Seed Act of 1939 was not a dramatic, headline-grabbing law, but its impact on the seed industry, and consequently on the design of the seed packet, was profound and lasting. The Act's primary goal was to ensure that buyers received accurate information, allowing them to make informed decisions about the seeds they purchased. It was, in essence, a truth-in-labeling law for the seed trade. The law meticulously specified the information that had to be clearly printed either on the packet itself or on a tag attached to it. For vegetable seeds sold in packets, like those destined for home gardens, the requirements were specific. Each packet had to bear the name of the kind and variety of the seed. For example, it was no longer sufficient to label a packet cabbage, it had to be cabbage golden acre. This was a direct response to the old practice of selling nondescript or misidentified seeds. If the seeds were of a variety that did not meet a minimum germination standard set by the Secretary of Agriculture, the packet had to be labeled below standard in a large, conspicuous font, and it also had to show the actual germination percentage and the date of the test. For seeds that did meet the standard, a statement of the germination percentage was not federally required, though by this time many companies included it anyway as a matter of good practice and to comply with various state laws. The law also required the packet to display the name and address of the company that was selling the seed or responsible for its labeling. This established clear accountability. If a gardener planted a packet of Detroit dark red beets and ended up with white turnips, they knew exactly which company was responsible. The Act made it unlawful to make any false or misleading claims in advertising associated with the seed, which implicitly included the illustrations on the packets. While this did not completely stop the practice of using idealized images, it did curb the most egregious and fantastical depictions that had been common in earlier eras. The impact of the Federal Seed Act on the physical layout of the seed packet was immediate and universal. The legally mandated information now had a permanent, non-negotiable place in the design. The back and, increasingly, the side flaps of the packet became the designated zones for this block of dense, regulated text. Graphic designers and printers working for the seed companies now had to approach the packet as a two-sided object with distinct functions. The front remained the realm of marketing, designed to catch the eye and inspire the desire to garden. It was the emotional heart of the packet. The back became the realm of legal compliance and technical instruction, the rational brain of the operation. This led to a more formulaic and predictable layout. A typical packet from the 1940s, post-Federal Seed Act, would have the full-color illustration dominating the front, along with the variety name and company logo. The back would feature a clear, organized block of text. This would include detailed planting instructions, often with a small map of the United States showing recommended planting times for different climate zones. It would also include the legally required information, the variety name repeated, the company name and address, and any necessary germination data. The paper stock used for packets also became more standardized. Companies sought a balance between paper that was inexpensive enough for mass production, sturdy enough to protect the seeds during shipping and handling, and with a surface that could hold the vibrant inks of the color illustration without bleeding. Parallel to this legislative standardization of information was the continuing commercial standardization of packet dimensions. While the Federal Seed Act did not mandate specific sizes, the economics of the industry had, by this point, resulted in a de facto standard. The approximately 3.25 by 4.5-inch packet was the undisputed workhorse of the industry. This size was the result of a century of accumulated practical wisdom. It was large enough for a compelling illustration, but small enough to be inexpensive. It fit perfectly into the commission boxes that still sat on the counters of hardware and general stores across the country. It was an efficient size for automated filling and sealing machines, which were becoming more common in the larger seed houses. It was also an ideal size for mail-order fulfillment. easily tucked into shipping envelopes. The process of manufacturing these packets was itself a marvel of industrial efficiency. The designs for many different packets would be arranged on a single, massive printing plate, a process known as imposition, to maximize the use of every square inch of a large paper sheet. After printing, these sheets were fed into machines that would cut, crease, fold, and apply a thin line of adhesive to the seams, turning the flat sheet into a pile of finished, open-topped envelopes in a matter of moments. A brief but significant event that further cemented the packet's form and function was the Second World War. The war effort promoted the concept of the Victory Garden on an unprecedented scale. The government encouraged citizens on the home front to plant gardens to supplement their food supply and boost morale. This led to an explosion in the demand for vegetable seeds. Millions of Americans, many of them with no prior gardening experience, took up the spade and trowel. For these novice gardeners, the information on the seed packet was not just helpful, it was essential. Seed companies responded to this patriotic surge. Packet designs from the war years often incorporated patriotic slogans like "Plant for Victory" or "Red, White and Blue" motifs. More importantly, the need to educate a new army of gardeners meant that the clarity and comprehensiveness of the planting instructions became more crucial than ever. The packet was a primary tool of a national mobilization effort. The standardization that had been developing for decades ensured that this tool was reliable and effective. A new gardener in California and one in Maine could both pick up a packet of carrot seeds and find the same clear, dependable information needed to grow a successful crop. By 1950, the journey of the American garden seed packet from chaotic novelty to meticulously standardized object was largely complete. The forces that shaped it were a perfect microcosm of American industrial and social history. The push for a consistent size came from the practical needs of new technologies like chromolithography and new business models like the mail-order catalog and the commission box system. It was standardization driven by efficiency and economies of scale. The push for consistent and truthful information came from the progressive era's faith in science, its demand for consumer protection, and the government's willingness to regulate commerce for the public good. It was standardization driven by a quest for accountability and trust. The result was the object we know today, a quiet masterpiece of design and information science. Its dimensions are a legacy of 19th century printing presses. Its beautiful, evocative illustration is a descendant of the chromolithographic art that first captivated the nation's gardeners. And its dense, orderly block of text on the back, the planting zones, the germination rates, the variety name, the net weight, the company address, is the direct result of a long, slow, and determined effort by scientists, activists, and legislators to make the marketplace for seeds an honest and transparent one. The seed packet is a humble thing, easily overlooked, but its placid, predictable surfaces contain a rich and detailed history of how American commerce grew, evolved, and was ultimately, for the betterment of all, brought to a quiet and sensible order. It is a story not of sudden change, but of gradual refinement, a slow sanding down of rough edges, until what was left was a simple, reliable, and profoundly useful object.